Don't lose the wonder in your eyes. I can see it right now when you smile. Let me go back for a while. Let me go back for a while to that magic time. You can call it nostalgia, I don't mind. Standing on that windswept hillside, listening to the church bells chime. Listen to the church bells chime in that magic time. Oh, the road, it never ends. Glad to see you, my old friend. Once again, we'll sit right down and share the wine. Shivers up and down my spine. It's a feeling so divine. Let me go back for a while. Got to go back for a while to that magic time. To see you, my old friend. Once again, we'll sit down and share the wine. Gotta go back in your prime. The sun is gonna shine when we go back for a while. Let me go back for a while to that magic time. Don't lose the wonder in your eyes. You're right there when you smile. Got to go back for a while. Got to go back for a while to magic time. Call it nostalgia, I don't mind. Standing on that windswept hillside, listening to the church bells chime. Listening to the church bells chime in that magic time. Let me go back for a while. Let me go back for a while to that magic time.
Hello, everybody. It's Fiona Timms here. Vicky, the White Zulu. You know who I am. And here's a shout out to Clive, who always puts such nice comments beneath all my readings. Hi, Clive. Today we have Durban, 1970. My mother and Ba go toe to toe, and part one of our wedding. I must explain here that after I'd met Fred at the July handicap races in mid-1969, I'd spent up until September 1970, first at Nora House, and then about 8 months living with Fred in his flat right under my parents' noses. I turned 20 at the end of January 1970 and became engaged to him in July of the same year. So we've left 69 behind. I drove up to the farm 2 days before my wedding, while Fred took his parents sightseeing up the Zululand north coast, after which they drove up to the Natal Midlands to stay at Rawdon's, an attractive thatched double-storey hotel overlooking a lake just outside Nottingham Road. My parents had invited the three of them over for lunch the day before our wedding, and I was interested to see how they'd all get on, particularly as they were so alike in so many ways, both pig-headed and snobbish. Ba arrived with Bob looking rather hot and dusty after 20 miles on our horrendous district road, now at its very worst at the end of the dry winter season. She was dressed in a simple, innocuous pair of navy blue long pants with a blue and white polka-dotted short-sleeved top tucked into the waistband. My mother scored her first point by appearing from the house to greet them on the front lawn, dressed in a beautifully cut, crisp, pale blue linen shirtwaist dress to match her eyes, looking like a cool, serene Grace Kelly as she walked over to their car. Fred had brought his trout rod and, after shaking hands with my father and giving my mother a kiss, saying, "I'll be back at 1 in time for lunch, Doff," he loped off down the front paddock towards the river. I was torn between following him or staying, but I was curious to see how things would pan out on the veranda, so I took a seat in the background. Over preliminary and potent gins on the front veranda, I could see them trying to size each other up. My parents had immediately calculated by the way the Mackay-Jameses spoke and dressed that they were unusual for English county people. Eccentric is fine if you're very, very rich or titled. Then it's funny and entertaining. These two weren't the usual upper-class eccentrics, though. First of all, they had no title, which meant they had to have acquired land and wealth comparatively recently. This meant they were nouveau riche, new money, to be sneered at behind hands once they'd left. If there was sufficient money, though, they would be acceptable, or could be acceptable. Once my father had established the size and quality of Glen Cruton, a castle and 9,000 acres of surrounding property, almost twice as big as our 5,000-acre ranch, and discovered that the Mackay-Jameses also had a huge 3-story mansion in Florida, with its 2,000 acres of lucrative orange groves, he became more affable towards them. Score 1 to the Mackays then. Bob was less impressed when he made inquiries about the size of our farm and how many head of cattle my father ran. 1,000. Big by South African standards. It wasn't as much land as Glen Cruton had. But just maybe beef was more profitable than citrus. He seemed mildly pleased that my father had been to Cambridge, but not nearly as excited as Dad had been to learn that Fred was at Eton and Cambridge. Mum was longing to show off her garden to Ba, as she'd heard that Ba was a horticulturist. I don't think my mother actually knew what a horticulturist was. She assumed it was just somebody keen on gardens. I was aware of this and followed, walking meekly behind them to see what happened. Ba scored her first point with my mother for her enthusiastic admiration for the garden, but lost it again as she kept asking my mother for the Latin and botanical names. Oh, there's a Podocarpus latifolius, and isn't that a ponticum? And appeared genuinely puzzled when my mother didn't know. Oh, really, darling? She called everybody darling simply because she couldn't be bothered to learn their names. Surely that's a Podocarpus pencili. You must know that. My mother squirmed uncomfortably and had to admit she didn't. I knew how it would stick in her craw to have to do so. She liked to present herself as being perfect in every way. Mum quickly changed the subject by showing Ba the view of the valley from our front lawn. Isn't it spectacular? The peaked mountain there is called the Intlizela, and that's the Umgeni River running down past all that bush, she said, waving a graceful hand around the scenery. Yes, lovely. Now, I'm thirsty. Let's have a drink, commented Ba shortly. There was a distinct chill in the air between them by the time they came back from their stroll. Their capacity for hard liquor in the form of a lot more gin soon started to lighten the atmosphere a little, but I still had the feeling that I was a spectator at a dogfight and the participants were only circling one another, legs and tails stiffened at this stage. As they sat down on the white cane armchairs on the veranda in the hot midday sun, Ba pulled her trousers off to reveal that her top was actually a tiny, fanny-length baby doll dress, revealing matching polka-dotted bloomers, which looked suspiciously familiar. Oh, my Lord, I thought, it's the bikini all over again. She lit another cigarette, stretched her skinny, bare brown legs out and sighed theatrically. I do love to get the sun on my skin, she rasped in her strange, part American, part Scottish accent. Her skin looked like old biltong, leathery and hanging in loose, dark brown folds with a fine coating of pale hair. My mother drew herself up in her chair, crossed her sandaled feet primly underneath, and stared in horror. She was speechless. All her inbred good manners deserted her now, as never in all her life had she come across an occasion where one of her middle-aged guests had stripped down to this type of outfit before. It was quite beyond the pale. I could see her glancing anxiously at the doorway from the veranda into the sitting room. Mackay was soon going to pop his white fez through there to tell us that lunch was ready in the dining room. What would the servants think? Desperately she turned to me and said, "Go and tell Masango to bring the lunch in. We're ready." After I'd done so, I walked down to the bottom of the paddock to call Fred from the river bank. We walked back, arms around each other, and wiping away tears of laughter as I gave him a blow-by-blow account of the morning's events. Because Ba and Bob had already dismissed my parents as colonials, they seemed quite surprised how tasteful our home was, with the servants all dressed in their immaculate whites, serving beautifully cooked English country food of gleaming silver. There were decanters of chilled wine and crystal glasses to drink from, all of which went down rather well, including Mackay acting as butler, complete in white uniform with a red sash around him, and handing round the food. Coffee by the demi-tasse was served afterwards on the front veranda, with cream, sugar and petit four, little cakes. Straight after lunch, as he always did, my father said he was off to have a snooze and offered the Mackay-Jameses a bed to rest on in the spare room. Bob accepted with alacrity, but Ba had leapt to her feet and said, mystifying, "I'm off for some eki." Later, while sipping afternoon tea on the veranda, to my utter joy, after she reached her hand out to take a proffered teacup from my mother, Ba, still in her baby doll outfit, paused, raised her right arm and sniffed her own armpit. Then she took another spectacularly loud, deep sniff and announced with some pride, "Pooh, I stink." I was fairly startled at this revelation, but not as shocked as my mother and my father were, especially Mum, who sat there rigidly, the teacup still held out, her eyes open wide with horror. Body odour was not something white people discussed, let alone suffered from. The subject was only ever mentioned in the context of Africans. They have that munt smell anyway, which I can't stand, but when it gets really hot, my God, they can pong, according to my mother. And if any of the house girls manifested the slightest hint of BO, she was sent off to bath with a cake of Lifebuoy soap to remedy the problem. "I've just got back from a quick walk to the top of that mountain over there," said Ba conversationally, and pointed to the top of our Intlazela, a peak almost identical to the Intlazan, which Scott had to climb as a cack at Michaelhouse. "Good grief," said my father, and he promptly christened her the Mountain Goat, behind her back, of course. "Completely dippy," he said after they'd gone, and shook his head. Of course, my mother was still reeling from the revelation of the baby doll outfit and kept going on about it. How could she? So unsuitable, so common. What possessed her? And finally, "I'm hoping now it'll rain for the wedding tomorrow, as I can't have her wearing that outfit. What would all my friends think?" She was generally distressed at the prospect of all her smart, gossipy friends sniggering behind their hands at the apparition of her new relation by marriage's formal wear. I didn't say anything about the tartan outfit, but I couldn't resist pointing out the possibilities that if it was a nice hot day, as was forecast, there was a good chance that Ba would yank off her baby doll dress, dragging it over her head to reveal one of her many handmade matching bikinis. According to Fred, whenever she had her dressmaker run up another baby doll dress that revealed matching brooks, she always had a bikini made in the same material to wear under that dress. She did it in front of everybody at the Durban Country Club, I reminded Mum. I'd already regaled my parents with as many of Ba and Bob's eccentricities as I possibly could, so as to spook them really badly. I relished the look of disbelief on her face when I told Mum about the country club swim on our first meeting, and then their utter horror when Fred confirmed it on the day the Mackay-Jameses had come out to the farm for lunch to meet my parents. "Oh, Mummy's always doing that," he said casually. "It doesn't matter where we are, sorry, or who we're with. She'll whip off her clothes and reveal her bikini, sometimes, if the sun comes out, throwing herself down on the front lawn at somebody's county home to sunbathe. Everyone in Florida and Scotland is used to her. She's always sunbathing like that on the lawns of St. John's Wood Park too, as we have a townhouse there," he added. "I've never known Mummy not to wear her bikini underneath everything else, as she worships the sun and can't get enough of it." That's when both Mum and Dad knew for certain that it was true. Fred would never lie to them. So there was every possibility that Ba would strip off during the wedding speeches and fling herself down, sprawled out on the grass outside the huge marquee, which was already up, smoking one of her 6 packs a day, unfiltered capstan cigarettes for all 300 guests to gasp at in horror. She might sunbathe right there in front of everybody, my parents knew, especially if she'd been at the Cane Spirits, another of her many peccadillos, which I joyfully recounted to Mum and Dad, gleefully embellishing on how Ba's inhibitions went out the window after a couple of those, and which accentuated her bizarre speech and behaviour. Knowing how deeply my parents revered the rich upper-class English, Fred had been a willing accomplice, adding scurrilous tidbits of her and Bod's Betties, as she would have called them, that I hadn't yet heard about. Like on speech day at Eton every year, she'd lain out in the sun in her bikini on the manicured lawns of that hallowed establishment, and repeated that behaviour on many public occasions when he was at Cambridge. Fred hardly noticed when his mother undressed down to her bikini at public or private functions. It was something she'd done all his life, and he was used to it. She had embarrassed him and his siblings so much, so loudly, badly, and so often, that they were completely inured to it. I wanted Mum to stew for as long as possible. It was a sweet sort of revenge for me to see my parents so blatantly uncomfortable with everything about these hideously eccentric Mackay-Jameses, but were at a loss as to what to do. They certainly couldn't say anything about it to their faces. They'd made such a big thing about Fred having gone to Eton and Cambridge, his being out of the top drawer, and his parents attending Scottish summers in a castle in Oban, and the winters in a mansion in Florida, and owning a smart flat in St. John's Wood in London to boot. What they hadn't bargained for was Ba's spectacularly peculiar dress sense, or lack thereof, her strange appearance and bizarre mannerisms, and the peculiar language those two spoke. French interspersed with code words. Fred and I called it bar speak, used by the most extreme of snobs to alienate common folk, especially us colonials. She overlooked the fact, of course, that I knew and spoke French fluently, so a lot of her comments about me I got. But hey ho, mad woman. I wasn't exactly the Mackay-James idea of the perfect wife for their beloved Ferrier either, but there wasn't a thing they could do about it. That is all for the time being, and there's more to come next week. I would like to thank John Moslane for putting aside his Friday afternoons to help me produce these videos. Without him, I could not do this. I would also like to thank Sean van Vuren for his sterling work in uploading my videos to my YouTube channel, adding the photos, as well as managing my channel so professionally. If you would like to know more about my other works, I have written 5 books in all, and each one is autobiographical. Please visit my website at www.whitezulubook.com, where you will find a lot more information as well as plenty of photographs. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed my life story, and there is plenty more to come. A thumbnail photo will be attached each week, and thank you so much for all your support and all the very kind remarks you make in complimenting me on my work. I really appreciate it. Goodbye.